You should do the countdown twice. It was good.
It was good. Good morning, mediums. Welcome to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. It's season 2, episode 63. I am back after a 2-week hiatus. Of course, I am Josh Hayes here with my co-host Scott Moon, and today science fiction author Jon Del Arroz joins the show. Jon is the author of the steampunk novel For Steam and Country and the Dragon Award nominated novel for Best Military Science Fiction Novel 2017 Rescue Run. Jon is a hybrid author, independent and traditionally published, and today he's joining us to talk about his writing journey. Jon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Josh, and hello, Scott. Nice to be here with you on a Monday morning.
Monday mornings are a little shaky for Scott and I, as the coffee must flow and must flow a lot for Monday mornings.
And I'll have you know that Mondays are very relative because I, of course, haven't had weekends off for a while, and so for me, it's like today's actually my Saturday. So
yes,
good. Nice,
right? Yeah, let's throw a bit of confusion there right off the start. And whatnot.
Let's see. Monday is my Sunday. Is that my Tuesday is my Monday?
I'm so happy.
Mondays are definitely my Mondays.
Monday is just Monday. Just stop. It's just Monday.
But Friday is my Friday. So Tuesday is my Monday and Friday is my Friday. So
I'm just really happy that Josh is back. We did a show last week. Josh was off exploding things or whatever he does in his superhero life or whatever.
That's right. Dun, 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 dun.
So I'm ready to go. I'm interested to see what Jon's got for us today. And everybody should know my coffee cup is literally filled like right to the top, so there could be a horrible accident.
Mine's halfway down because during show prep here we were I was just guzzling this thing, so hopefully I'll have a lot of energy for you guys.
This is gonna work out well. This is going to be perfect. All right.
Hey, we got a lot of people hanging out in the live chat today, guys. Yeah. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us. JR is actually here on a Monday. That's crazy.
That's crazy.
JR is hanging out with us, and Steve.
Is that JR Hanley?
JR Hanley, yes. Steve,
he's my boy. Hey.
What's up, JR?
JR is a longtime watcher and fan of the show, and also a great writer. So good time.
And Vicky Malone Kennedy's here, as Steve the Man Chuck Manley is here also, and Ken McClellan is here. Hey Ken, what's up, buddy? Kayleen and everyone else that's in the.
We're gonna miss some people,
window.
I think, which is sad, but we'll get them later.
We'll say whatever it is. So, Jon, we'll get to your writing here. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Jon, could you share a little bit about yourself and your writing?
Sure. I started writing in comics for the most part. I started a webcomic in 2012, and it ran a couple years. I got eight traditional comic issues of 22 pages out of it. And I started on the 9th, and my website got hacked at the time. I was getting about 3,000 to 4,000 readers a week, which I was publishing a page a week and just releasing it that way. And I found that I was paying for the art. It was very expensive. It was beautiful art, but there was no way to monetize it. And so I just stopped doing that, and I started getting into prose at that point. So the comic thing was going pretty well. I think I'm going to release it soon in a comicsology format. Try to capture some of the. I think a lot of my readers now probably have not read it, and so I can get that out for them, and then hopefully use that money to pay for art to finish the story. But that's in the future. From there, I actually went into some game writing. So I worked for Doomtown Reloaded, which is based in the Deadlands Savage Worlds RPG universe. It's a card game, and in the cards they had like little flavor text at the bottom, and it kind of tell a story within each set. And each set would kind of progress the story along. So I got to name all the cards. I got to do that, and I got to write flash fiction about every 2 weeks or so on their website. So I did that for 2 years. Through that, I landed my Rescue Run novel contract, which I was writing novels during the course of that and kind of honing my craft, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And worked on that for about 1.5 years as I kind of really got myself down to a professional level at that point. And it is a licensed tie-in game, but it definitely stands alone as its own work. So people who do not play the game definitely have had fun reading it. I think I've sold a lot of copies of the game just based on that, based on the book too.
So the Star Realms is a game.
Mm-hmm.
Card game.
It's a card game. It's a card game and app, and it's very simple. It's just ships and bases, and you just try to kill your opponent with your damage that you do from ships while you play. And it's a deck builder if you guys are familiar with those type of games. So yeah.
I'm looking at your Amazon page and looking at Star Realm, and that's your traditionally published novel, because we said you're a hybrid. And I was looking at your publisher as an interesting publishing house.
Yeah, they're actually cool people. They closed up recently, at least for new submissions. I think I think they may want to reopen in the future, but they they're put out several really good anthologies, pro rates, and I was in one of those to start. As they were kind of building my career there before I went on. Jennifer Brozek actually edited the book. She was working for Evil Girlfriend Media there. She's worked for Bane. She's done a lot of her own work. She's done Shadowrun RPG novels, a bunch of those, and she's a hell of a good writer and a great editor too. She was nominated for the Hugo in 2015, something like that too. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I worked with just the best in the business to get myself started here.
Chuck Manley says Savage Worlds Rock. It's his game go-to gaming system.
Me too.
I've never played it before, but I mean, it looks very interesting. I played, this is going to date me, but when Magic the Gathering first came out in card form, I played that. Never really got into it, but I did play it. I was never one of those guys that carried around a certain case full of decks. But I'm slowly getting back into the board game thing and card games. So that looks very interesting.
Yeah, Star Realms is a great one because it's so light. I mean, I don't want to just show for Star Realms the entire time, but it's such a light game, and it's easy. It's easy to play. I don't get anything for it. I just like the game, and that's why I started writing for it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that's friendly for everybody. So
that's cool.
That's very neat. And then you have your steampunk novel, which is your first novel that's not game related, or fiction that's not game related, right?
Well, yeah. I mean,
that you've published.
My short story through Evil Girlfriend Media and the Naughty or Nice anthology was that's not even true. I published a few short comic stories through a couple indie magazines a while back. I don't even remember the names of them, but you can look for them out there. And I had one short story that was through a press that went out of business, and so they're no longer up. Then I had the Naughty or Nice short stories. So I've written a lot of non-game related. I just kind of got into that because I like gaming, and it kind of worked out timing wise. But yeah, I'm trying to kind of focus on building my own properties at this point, and make my own thing. So what I found in terms of having brands and licensed properties that you're working for, yeah, it's useful, but it's kind of a double-edged sword. So you have the people who are really adamant about the game, and they're going to check things out because of that. But what happens is people who don't play the game go, I'm not going to check that out because I don't play the game. And so so it kind of balances itself out in a way that it's a little hard to build an audience that way, I feel like. So I think it's better. I would recommend to authors to focus on their own work if they can. If you want to do something just because you love it, I mean, it's one thing. That's why I went into Star Realms and Doomtown, because I love those games. It was more that than wanting to really build a career off of that. But
I think you can. I think that's the love of the craft, the love of the process. We get people lost when they try to make it go professional, I guess, and make a living at it. But that's huge. You're never going to go wrong doing something you love with this.
That's very true.
You have so much freedom.
It comes across in the work, and I was talking about the Orville, which is a TV show on Fox right now. And I've never been a big Seth MacFarlane fan. But with this show, even though it's not, I wouldn't say it's like the deepest, richest stories I've ever seen. No. But the fact that he just loves what he's doing and he cares about it in a geek sense, and it comes across in the show in a point where it's kind of intoxicating to a viewer, because it's like, I get to have fun because you're having fun, right?
Mm-hmm. I think you need to poke fun at the serious series sometimes. It kind of keeps everything in perspective. I watched the first episode of that on my phone the other day. It was I got a chuckle.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
I like chuckles.
I watched part of it. I had kids running around, so I couldn't watch the whole thing. They kept yelling and screaming. But the part that I saw, I thought was neat. And then I saw somebody posted not really a review, but just kind of thoughts about the show. And it was like you just said, not taking itself seriously, but then it's got a serious aspect to it, and then there's also comedy kind of thrown in. And so I was glad that it wasn't like a Family Guy slapstick deal. I love Family Guy, but you could definitely tell that he was paying homage to Star Trek and a couple other series that are like that, and still kind of keeping it light and making little silly comments here and there. That was kind of neat.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it so far, and I like the idea of kind of just not taking yourself too seriously. I think there's a trap as a writer or as a art producer or whatever to think of yourself as some like literary genius or whatever, and you can't tell who's really going to be in that literary category until 100 years later, because almost everything gets lost, right? So there's just too much content. So if you take yourself too seriously, I think it makes the work a little less fun. And I start almost every work of mine just coming up with like a silly concept, even though my books aren't really comedy. I mean, they're pretty serious sci-fi. I make just like ridiculous concepts, and I just go, okay, I just want to play with this ridiculous concept because it's fun.
So tell us a little bit about the concept of For Steam and Country. From the title, I gather it's a steampunk and not strictly like military science fiction like your other books. But let's talk about it. Give us kind of the rundown.
I actually think the genres, in terms of having written in both, I feel like they really can have a lot of similar elements. Now, a lot of steampunk out there. The reason I really wrote it is because there's a lot of steampunk out there, and it's really just like it just feels like girls having tea party cosplay, and then there's like some romance thrown in. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. I'm happy for that to exist, and
tea parties are Josh's favorite thing. It's
that is true.
I knew that. I knew that going in here.
You have to do the finger thing.
which is fine. I mean, I get it. I like going to steampunk conventions, and they do those sort of things to kind of homage the Victorian area, and it's pretty fun. But none of the books really had like an action adventure sort of focus to them so much. The closest I could think of that's kind of mainstream. Well, Jim Butcher's done it now, but when I started thinking about it, Sherry Priest's Bone Shaker really kind of was close to that, but it went into like zombie dark fiction. So it wasn't like a strong sort of swashbuckling adventure, and that's what I wanted out of steampunk, because these costumes are ridiculous. I mean, you got people walking around with eye patches and weird things all over them. I mean, it's just about fun and silliness, and so you might as well go all in on like a crazy adventure. So I thought, okay, well, what's a ridiculous concept? What if like a farmer girl just like inherits an airship that's like a war machine? What does she do with it? And I just went from there.
Yeah, I like that concept. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
So when you went into steampunk, can you kind of break that down a little bit for maybe people who aren't familiar with the genre? You've got magic, but you've also got trinkets and things like that.
Yeah. So steampunk really as a genre like I said, it's an homage to the Victorian era in some ways, and it's kind of spread out a little to where you're getting all sorts of cultures from that time period. But for the most part, it's people wanting to do kind of Dickens fair style cosplay, and then add like a dystopian element to it, or add like a science fiction element to it, or just kind of twist it so it's kind of like an alt history sort of thing. To where there's airships, primarily a lot of stuff's done via alchemy. The ray guns sometimes exist in steampunk. It really just depends. It's such a fluid subgenre, but the sort of the focus on the Victorian setting is very very prominent in that. So in mine, I decided to create a fantasy world that's just completely different, because most of them actually are set in Victorian England, and I wanted a nice fantasy world of my own to play with.
So what kind of world building elements did you have to create to make this world a full, complete world that you can write several novels? Looks like this is the beginning of a series, and so can you kind of describe what goes into the world, what's the world about, and the kind of like the main plot points? And I mean, no spoilers. Spoiler alert! First time.
We do spoiler alerts the correct way once in a while. Usually we spoil after.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the world.
So basically, it's a pretty big world, and the next volume is going to expand the scope of it a lot. But what I focused on in the first book is there's two empires kind of at war. There's the Kingdom of Ruslandia, which is where our main characters and our heroes kind of take place, and they're just like a good kingdom under a good king. I got some good reviews. People were like, it's nice to see a monarchy where they respect private property rights.
Nice.
And I'm like, well, yeah, if I had a king, I'd want him to respect my private property rights. So, that was kind of the onus behind that. And it's kind of a budding late 1800s deal. They have a system they have a knighthood system where it's continued even into that era. And so the knights are still running around, and they're doing work for the king. And they've got their own sort of round table set up, which is kind of off to the side, but I spent a lot of time off page developing that. So there's a lot that's not in the book regarding that, just because I had fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
And really, my main onus was, I wanted to make an airship. I wanted an airship like Final Fantasy 12 style, where it was propellers and not a blimp.
Right.
And I seriously wrote an entire book just because I wanted that. But so I wanted more of a propeller style airship, because I don't see many of those in steampunk, and that kind of got into that end of the world. On the other side, I have my like evil Wyranth Empire, and they're dominated by emperors going back, and I kind of gave a sort of like Prussian military feel to them from the early 1900s and all that.
That's why you have the helmet with the little spiky thing.
Yeah, the helmet with the little spiky.
That's pretty important in most stories.
I love it.
I mean, Josh probably has one back there.
That's around here somewhere.
Yeah,
right next to my cowboy hat.
Right next to your blimp.
And I am that shallow that I just wanted to like think about dudes in the army with the helmets with the little spiky thing, and that is why I wrote them again. Yeah. So I
like the color blue. Can we write something that gives me an excuse to use?
Right.
Which actually is a good idea. I'm going to do that now.
So I was just trying to set up a dichotomy between two empires in my world building for the first book, but the next one's going to be a lot more exploratory, because now she's kind of got her feet under her, and I want my character to branch out into the world and have a little bit grander of an adventure. So it's gonna have a lot more different cultures to it. It's gonna be pretty interesting.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to ask how many books do you have planned for it, or do you think you're going to, is it kind of like a 1, 2, 3 series, or is it just writing novels in a universe?
I've planned an initial trilogy. So there's some events that kind of got set into motion in the first one, which is pretty simple story intentionally, because I really want to ground people in what's in the main first conflict, and focus on the main character and get you attached to the main character. That was my goal of the first book. And then it's going to open up a little more with some of the supernatural elements that happened towards the end of the book. I'm trying not to spoil it, but
spoiler.
But
a near spoiler. A near spoiler.
It's going to focus on that and develop that a lot more in the second and third books, which are going to be a consequence of what happened at the end of the first book. Beyond that, I mean, I've written a short flash fiction that was kind of a background deal. It's on uprisingreview.com. They specialize in flash fiction. And you don't need it to read the book, but it's free, and if you like it, then that's a good spot to go. And I've outlined a couple short stories, but I haven't really gone there. But I have such a world that's developed that I'm going to utilize it for a lot of things, whether it ties directly into this or not.
Absolutely. I think doing that really kind of gives a lot of, like you said, expansiveness to your series. That you mentioned you wrote a lot of stuff off the page with your knights and what they were doing in their organization, and that's something that I think a lot of people that are just starting out don't realize that they need to do, is leave a lot of that off and don't put it in the actual book.
I was going to mention that takes a lot of discipline to take and not try to force everything into a story that doesn't really belong in the story, but still have it You never know when you can use that with something else, you know. So
Right.
harder,
Yeah.
so
I think just like having that there gives you a confidence in your world that comes across on the page. And so if you have a lot of detail of what's going on and kind of like the history and different things that aren't necessarily relevant to the plot, it's good. It's good because the confidence in your storytelling comes across to the reader, and that confidence looks like you know what you're talking about, and that makes you look like a better writer than you might be.
Right. Well, it definitely, I mean, it definitely kind of separates. I don't want to say the wheat from the chaff, but you have some people that start, you know, they have their first novel, say like, you know, your Steam and Country novel, and they want to put everything in there because everything that they've done to build the world is cool for them. And we've talked about this before on the show, where you create something, you put 3% of that into your novel, and then, like you said earlier, writing short stories, those nights you can write a short story or novella or short novel or a completely separate novel that kind of looks into and explores that aspect of the story, but it doesn't affect the story that you're writing for now. And I think that's really cool. And I think taking advantage of that with short stories and novellas is really a good avenue for writers, especially just to open up their income base to tap different markets, you know?
I actually, so just novel writing wise, like when I first wrote the novels, I wrote a space opera book first as my first book that's not out. I wrote for Steam and Country, and then I wrote the Star Realms book. So so Star Realms really is like my third effort at it, and that's why it doesn't come across as a first novel so much. And then for Steam and Country, I went back and I just edited it with what I knew after getting to that point. And so you know, where you're talking about stuff that doesn't need to be in there, I mean, I scrubbed it real hard. So in my first drafts, I probably put a lot more as I'm just thinking about things and just getting things out there than I do in future drafts, because I'm trying to you know, figure out the world as I'm writing it, even though I do a lot of outlining and world building prep ahead of time. So there is that, and I have gotten a little criticism actually for the beginning of this book where I set the stage a little slow, so you kind of get to know Zara a little better before it opens up into the wild adventure. And I'm actually learning from that. So my next, well, I don't know. So I fixed my space opera now. Now my space opera, I built that world for so many years now and have re-edited and written it from scratch to a point where it's kind of crazy. I've spent way too much time on it. It'll be coming out. And I've actually written a side book that crosses over parallel at the same time at this point, and they overlap, but they're completely different stories. So you get a very broad look at the culture of what's going on in the future for humanity and the aliens, just based on one of them is very focused on the aliens because we actually traveled to the alien starship, and one of them is very focused on the socio-political stuff going on in humanity, and meanwhile the war is happening, and you know, so they overlap, and that'll be really cool. Hopefully I did it well enough that my readers will like that. But there are ways to utilize that information, and you're right. You just got to take that off the page and just scrub it. What's interesting, that's why I like to in my second draft wait about 3-4 months after I've written it to even look at my second draft, so I can not be excited about the concept anymore. And that way I can kind of look at it from a more professional lens.
Do you ever use some of that world building, like if you have writer's block, you just pull out your off-page night culture and you can read through that and kind of get the creative juices flowing? That seems like that would help. I don't know if that's something you can use, or do you have?
I've never had writer's block.
Yeah, there you go. See, never mind. Your counsel retracts the question.
No worries. I think that might be a good thing. If you need prompts and things like that to kind of just get you going like that, I think that's an excellent way to do things. I mean, if you have all that information, it makes it much easier to just jump into writing a short story. We talked a little about the Four Horsemen universe, which
we should talk about that
before the show here.
Yeah,
and I'll talk about that real quick. You know, when you have a world, I mean, Chris Kennedy, when I was writing a short story for them, sent me this document of just like, this is the world that's like 20 pages. And I was like, sweet. And then I went back and I read their books, which were fantastic. Mark Wandry and his books are both wonderful. And just having all that information there, it does make it a lot easier to just like jump into a story and just write story, because you already know the information. You don't have to come up with it. So I think that would be a good tool for writer's block for somebody who is.
Yeah. And your story, it's called Lost and Found. And again, that's in the Fistful of Credits anthology. Do you want to talk about that story a little bit and kind of what you took out of that? Is that
what it's like writing in one of those somebody else's world might be something that's interesting.
Yeah, because I
was pretty nervous about that.
Well, and so was I. And actually, after reading the world outline, and like you said, this 20-page document that had so much in the world, and you read it, you're like, I don't know what to do. And it took me several, probably several weeks to kind of look at it and go, okay, this is what I want to do. And I think Scott and I will have a conversation later on maybe a future show about what we did for ours.
So we're in the next anthology after the one you're in, John.
Yeah.
And so we both kind of have seen that
Cool.
world building document. It is very, very interesting, very detailed, and they have a good setup.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job. They set it up really as a sandbox universe where there's just like, it's just so vast that you can really just touch upon anything and not have to worry about it in some ways. But I did want to stay very true and honest to what they were doing with their books at the same time. Now, in theory, I should have, this is my wheelhouse, I guess, because having written for the Deadlands Doomtown deal and having written for Star Realms, I'm definitely pretty good at taking somebody else's work and then crafting my own story through it. But I'm still nervous because I want them to be happy almost more than I want my readers to be happy, if that makes sense.
Right.
So my
go ahead.
My story, So I early this year I discovered a thing called the Pulp Revolution, and there's a guy out there. He wrote a sort of critical analysis of Dungeons and Dragons Appendix N, and he just went through every single book that was listed there. Which Appendix N is a list of works that Dungeons and Dragons was inspired by. And he went through every single one, including a lot that are just forgotten by time at this point, and was like, guys, storytelling used to be a lot more fun. Like, I mean, it used to be just like zany adventure and nobody cared. And they just cranked them out. And they just went as hard into an action adventure as they possibly could. So reading through that critical analysis, I've been influenced by that. And this was my first story I've written since reading that and since actively trying to just kind of push the action a little more in my stories. So I think that came across in this story. It's got some good military science fiction versus monster action, and hopefully came across pretty fun.
Yeah, I think it was very neat the way that they crafted their settings, so you can kind of take just a little part of it and expand with it. What was the thing when you read through their outline? What was the thing that kind of jumped out at you that you were like, I want to write about that?
I think I grabbed like a cartographer's guild, because I thought, what, nobody's gonna touch the cartographer's guild, because the guys who are gonna be writing this are like big military science fiction guys, so they're gonna go hard into the mechs, and they're gonna go hard into like the sort of mechanics of the combat and things like that. So I'm gonna take a small mercenary group that they can't afford the mech, and I'm gonna like partner them up with the cartography guild as they're like exploring this like thing that got lost in history, where where there was like a crash of an old alien starship, and they'll go explore that, hoping they can bring back information and sell it based on the technological information they find. And that was the tack I took on it. I looked for the most obscure, weird portion of it that nobody would touch, and so I could have something a little different.
Was there anything about it when you're reading through that are like, oh, this is intimidating, or I'm going to have a problem with this part of the story world?
Yeah, actually, I originally started with their like giant kaiju concept, which I think they're called the Canivars.
Right.
And my original monster idea was to have one of those in there, and as I read through it, it was like, oh, what I'm doing is not quite that, and it doesn't quite make sense on that. So I had to revise it. I actually worked with Chris on that. He didn't really want us touching the actual Canivars in the universe, because that is kind of their main plot line.
Right.
And
interfere with their regular books if you go some places.
So I worked with him to actually kind of come up with the alien race kind of experimented a little differently at times, because not all experiments work out, and in science, of course. And so when you have different technologies, you have competing technologies. You have beta and you have VCR, and VCR wins out, which is the Canavar. Well, maybe there was a beta sort of monster that they were working on also, and so I worked on it that way with Chris. And
I want to see the laser disc monster, from
right.
There's like 4 of them they made.
They were like, no, these aren't any good. Let's go to DVDs.
Yeah, just skip the laser disc. Although
laser HD discs.
Laser HD in 1987
that was a little
or whatever.
But it worked out.
Yeah, it's had to be done. So.
Well, it that kind of rolls into our show sponsor this week. Every week we have a sponsor, and this week it happens to be the second book in the Four Horsemen universe anthology, which is actually, I think, the 7th book in the series, and that's a few credits more. You can see the cover there on my sweet overlay.
It's not a manly overlay.
It's not a manly overlay, but it is a nice.
It's a manly overlay, but it's not a manly overlay.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
People that watch the show know what we're joking about. Otherwise, you're probably just very annoyed right now. So I'll just shut up and Josh do your thing.
The concept of this book is it's the 22nd century. Humanity has taken its first steps into the galaxy, and we found ourselves in a vast playground of alien races, environments, and cultures. As the newest players on the universal stage, though, our position is readily apparent, and we're at the bottom of the food chain. Welcome back to the Four Horsemen universe, where only a willingness to fight and die for money separates humans from the majority of other races. While some of the stories inside deal with mercenaries, others introduce readers to other guilds, organizations, and races that make up the landscape of the Four Horsemen universe, and many of them provide background information to the mainline novels. There's even a new form of life to get acquainted with, and a look at an alien interaction at its youngest level. Edited by the best-selling authors and universe creators Mark Wandry and Chris Kennedy. For a few credits more, includes 16 all-new stories in the Four Horsemen universe by a variety of best-selling authors, and some you may not have heard of yet, and that's probably me. It's a world where you get anything you want. Some things, though, are only available for a few credits more. This book features me and Scott. J.R. Hanley's in this book. Peter Quadrone, James Young, who's a personal friend of mine here in Kansas, Nick Cole, of course, and Chris Kennedy also has.
Who did the forward for that book?
The forward was done by the phenomenal David Weber, and we had him on the show 2 weeks ago, and we featured him in our longest episode ever on the show. And so go and check that anthology out, and all the other books in the Four Horsemen universe. They're pretty neat. So continuing on, we have talked about your books a little bit. I kind of want to get into a little bit of your process, because it sounds like starting out doing some writing for other people, and then this world building, this space opera that you have planned. And you said you have a novel dropping next month. Is that in your space opera?
Yeah, I've got a novella next month, which is called Gravity of the Game. And it is high concept of dream space, where it's expanded across the world, and the Michigan market, kind of similar to what we've got now, but on a wide level. And the commissioner of baseball to stand into space and on the moon, and he has to deal with the players' unions and deal with the other owners who don't want to help him in this. At the very least, it's dealing with the running a league like that.
We're got a little bit of a breakup there, so you may have to give us the title again and go through some of that.
Sure. It's called Gravity of the Game.
Okay.
And it is a field of dreams in space concept, where it's got a commissioner of a World Baseball League in the future, dealing with dwindling sales, dwindling market, like we got now in the MLB, and trying to expand the market into space to the moon colony, and having to deal with both the physics aspects of the problems that are going on, and deal with a league that doesn't really want to assist him in the matter. So there's a lot of business of running a league aspect to it that's that's I think very pertinent to today's market, but pretty fun as well. So it should come out like in the middle of the playoffs, and that was my thought.
And this is in your kind of a stepping stone to your new space opera universe, is that right?
Not really. I mean, it can be.
Okay.
It's I mean, it's set probably 150 years in the future, where my space opera set 500.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, I really wanted to deal with like sort of artificial gravity and things like that. And, you know, in my future space opera, they definitely have artificial gravity. So, you know, this could definitely be the way that was invented in that universe. I didn't think of it in terms of that when I wrote it. I just wrote a fun little baseball story. Yeah, I'll consider that.
Because they probably need a really important reason to develop that technology and get the support for you know, the funding to develop.
You know, I don't
baseball,
think so.
maybe that's it. I don't know.
Baseball,
Maybe.
you're right. That's you say a really important reason, but if you look at
Right, that's what I'm saying.
my main onus of this is if you look at sports and how it's pushed culture over time. It's you know, we do a lot for our entertainment. We do push a lot of technologies for our entertainment. A lot of our language is based on baseball. You know, we always talk about people striking out or whatever, and we have a lot of idioms that we use just based on baseball, and we don't even think about it. And so it is a logical sense that I think, you know, a real important technology would be developed for a big entertainment aspect like this.
Right.
So I'm curious, when you decide and you pick an idea, and we'll use your space opera story to kind of flesh out our conversation here while we're talking about process. But when you sit down with developing your world and characters and plot lines and ideas, what's the first thing that you focus on when you sit down and you say, okay, I'm going to do the space opera? What's the first thing you have to do to start out?
I get a high concept. And so, like I said, I've just picked out Cartographers Guild Exploration for that one, for the Four Horsemen universe. For this, I was like, how do I get baseball in space? For Steam and Country, it was I want an airship with propellers, right?
Right.
So I mean, they are. I mean, it sounds stupid, but I do start thinking about that, and then I'm sitting there in bed at night, like unable to sleep, going, okay, so here's with propellers with airships, so blah, blah, blah. And you know, suddenly, you know, after hours of not being able to sleep, I have a concept.
Right.
And with my space opera, that hopefully, actually, it's in editing right now, so I'm going to try to get my first book of that released before the end of the year. We'll see. With that, the high concept was, well, I wanted to have like a sort of James Bond spy thriller where they're going to aliens, and so we have to like be able to, like, you know, manipulate our you know, appearance. You know, there's several good Star Trek episodes where, like, you know, they dress up like Romulans and go and infiltrate the Romulans.
Right.
And I love that sort of thing. And so you have to have an alien group that's kind of human-like to do that. And then I thought, you know what, they never explore in those sort of things, really. They don't really like push the romance of those, and like having to deal with an alien human romance. Now they have. I mean, obviously they've done this in different combinations. Like Babylon 5 really pushed John Sheridan and Delen's romance with the Minbari human thing.
Right.
And that was one of the best freaking stories. I mean, I cried in the last episode because of that whole beautiful romance that developed there.
Right.
You know, I'll admit that. But so I love the idea of a war happening between species, and yet loyalty is being tested by actually having like a romantic relationship in the middle of that also. So it's a little more complicated of a concept than some of my others, but I think for building a space opera universe, I kind of needed a lot. But I started with that high concept of wanting kind of that spy element, and wanting a war between species, and wanting a romance between aliens and humans.
You know,
cutting out a little bit.
You mentioned that it was kind of in your words, you said a kind of a stupid idea to think about I want propellers on an airship and go from that, and that made your deal. But it's not. I mean, it's not that stupid. I think I honestly do. I think a lot of people sit down and they go, "That's a cool idea. What can I do with that?" As you mentioned Jim Butcher earlier in the show, and his Codex Alera series started with somebody telling him he couldn't combine the Lost Roman Legion with Pokemon, and he was like, "Yes, I can." And now,
hold my beer.
and now he's got a whole bunch of novels that are very, very popular. So I think if you take any idea that you can have and do something with it, I think is
a lot. I think we have that debate sometimes. Is it the idea or is it the execution? And then I think ideas are important, but most writers have had that experience where somebody comes to you that doesn't write and they say, "Well, I got a great idea for a book and this is going to make you rich." I'm like, "No, it's not. It's really not."
Think about this idea. Just take this for the face of it. Zombies in epic fantasy.
I'm sure it exists out there.
Game of Thrones is zombies in
Game of
epic
Thrones.
fantasy.
You're right.
And so if you could take a silly idea like that and say, "All right, I'm going to do zombies in epic fantasy."
Zombies in space.
The Expanse. Bam.
Yeah. So basically,
technically zombie, which I think
Brian Niemeyer's Dragon Award winning Soul Dancer has zombies in space too. So.
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah.
There's one called, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was a Kindle serial a couple of years ago, and it was zombies in in the Middle Ages, and they didn't really know what it was. I'll think of the name of it, but it's actually very good. Also, so
yeah, I think for selling a concept, you have to drill it down towards that. Obviously, I'm not working.
Yeah,
I'm not working on selling my space opera right now because it's not done yet, right? It's in with an editor. So I'm using multiple sentences to describe something, but you need to drill it down to one sentence really in that. So if you look at my baseball, I just say "Field of Dreams in Space." It automatically gives you an image, whether you like that or not. It's a good image for a girl who inherits an airship. For steampunk, same thing. So I think you do need to drill it down to something simple like that in order to sell it for sure.
It's important for people to say to you, "What's your book about?"
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a very painful question to ask because depending on, because like people, I've had it both ways. Somebody will ask me about my book and I'm trying to explain it to them and it takes like 25 minutes and you can see their eyes glazing over,
Right.
We've all done that.
Yeah. But you have to have that. And it's good to have the tagline for your promotional stuff and your written copy and all those things. And it gives you a goal or kind of a direction. Let's go that way.
And I think it's good that my novel that I'm working on that will now be pushed back until the end of 2018 because I've got several other things I'm working on. But
you got some big things, and I wish you got 2 super secret projects now.
Yeah. 2. I got 2 now.
Jealous.
Nice. But so that novel is basically Courage Under Fire and Black Hawk Down merged together in a future military science fiction setting. And so if you've seen those movies, you know the plot and you know what those movies are like, then you can say, okay, I know exactly what this novel is going to be. I'm
probably going to like that, so I'll give it a try.
It's good for readers because they know what to expect. So if you, and it's very easy to not set the right expectation for a book. I mean, I opened up, I went into Sarah Moss's Throne of Glass because it's a super popular YA. And my steampunk's a little YA, so I like to read a couple YA books a year just to make sure I know what's out there in the market and popular. And it was like, it started out, the books, I didn't read a description of it, so I didn't know what to look at, but it's got like a girl with like a bow on the cover and she's like kind of alien looking and it's pretty sweet. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be an epic, like sort of battle fiction. And it opened up in the first chapter like that a lot. And it was like, an assassin who's in jail and they're pulling her out for a secret mission. And I'm like, yeah, this is going to be badass. And it turned out, then it went to like this Hunger Games love triangle thing. From there, it's like, well, I wish somebody would have told me it was a Hunger Games love triangle thing. I mean, if I would have been mentally prepared from that, I probably would have liked the book better,
Yeah. Well, and that can lead to bad reviews too. If you have a poorly titled, poorly covered, your ad copy is not right, and then people are kind of disappointed, they don't know why, and then people can leave bad reviews. So it's important to put your best foot forward, I guess. I'm rambling now, so I'll just stop.
Yeah.
Rambling is what we do here, Scott.
Rambling, I do some rambling.
So let's talk about one of your typical day writing. I know that you're not a full-time writer yet. Hopefully, very soon. Same with us. So what does a day look like to you when you sit down and you want to get these words written?
I hate to say it, I don't see myself ever going to be a full-time writer. Even I don't know. My day job does really well. So like really well. So I don't want to. I'm not really interested in leaving it.
Well,
Just
do you have
right?
a problem with Josh and I moving into your basement and running the show out of there?
I'm in California, so I don't have a basement. Incidentally.
Oh yeah, bummer.
Yeah,
it was a good idea while it lasted.
I can't live in California because of court cases. So.
Oh.
Another long story.
All right, awkward pause.
So you're tell us about your day. Besides being interrupted by the host of Keystroke Medium, what's your day like?
Sure. Usually I wake up, I get a cup of coffee. I drink 2 cups of coffee while I'm trying to think of a blog topic, and then I crank out a blog topic real quick, whether that's a review of a book, whether that's something going on in the industry, whether that's just something I'm interested in at the time. It just depends. Today, you guys saved me from one. I just posted up the link to this, and it just made it easy for me. It's good because what I really appreciate is my hands get really tired. I've got like terrible tendonitis, and so I don't like to write as much as I possibly can. So when I can avoid doing a blog post, I said that wrong, but I'll get into that. If I can avoid if I can avoid doing a blog post, I will do so every time in exchange for video. That's great. So so I do that in the morning. I let that percolate. Usually, so I hit on a topic that people like about once a week, and once a week, I get a few thousand views on a thing, and it trickles over to all my other views and sells me a couple books a day. And I don't necessarily recommend doing that. It's a little nerve-wracking because it's like, crap, is there anything that's interesting that my readers want to hear about today? And you have to really hone what your readers want to be able to pull that off. And so I don't know. I don't know if it's that good or not, but I have more people reading my blog than I have my books at this point. So,
it's not a
so
bad
I guess so. It's not. I'm not complaining too much. So I do that, and then I work, and I either take a lunch break or like at the very end of my day, like when I'm done with work, I just give myself an hour or two, or sometimes I do both. Sometimes I do the lunch break and that. And I just shut everything down and I just write. And I get about, usually it depends on the day, and it depends on, if work's really busy, I can't spend the focus even on the lunch break because I've got kind of a fluid job where it gets busy and it doesn't get busy. It just depends. But I try to get out at least 1,500 words, and sometimes that goes to 2,000 or 3,000. And that I just have it blocked out, and I do it every day, regardless of whether I feel like it. I do it every day, regardless of whether I'm like inspired. I just have it as this is my time of day. I'm doing it, and this is my job. And you have to do that, otherwise you're not going to be able to crank out books that fast.
Right. We have a request from the chat room to post a link to your blog. So
I got it. I actually just had it up,
Sure.
and I'll bring it up here in a second and put it in the live chat so you have it.
Yeah, you can watch it. You can watch my interview with Keystroke Medium on my blog today.
That's usually where people break out, and become like.
As soon as you appear on Keystroke Medium, I hear that your fame and fortune will
money
skyrocket.
starts raining down from the sky. We've also discussed that it is healthy to be on Keystroke Medium. What was the thing? It's a scientific fact, really.
Oh yeah, it makes you younger or something.
Yeah, it does. It adds 10 years to your life. That's what it was. Being on Keystroke Medium adds 10 years to your life.
I'm just impressed with your graphic with your names on it. Most shows I've been on don't have that. That's pretty slick.
That's all Josh.
Yes.
He taught me how to do that.
And the cool little logo we got is Steve Bowyer. He does some pretty cool anthologies. He was on the show with his writing partner several months ago. Very, very fun people to talk with.
The people you meet, we should write that like it's a book. The
yes.
people you meet. I think,
maybe money off everyone's names. So I'm curious because I don't know if we've ever had an author on the show who was not actively trying to become a full-time author, which is outside the box in a couple of ways.
Mind
But
blown.
so because in Scott and I's position right now, if I made the money to be a full-time author, I don't know whether I would quit or not, because I like what I do as well. Obviously, my goal, my long-term goal, is to make enough money where I can become a full-time author. So not having that as a goal, what would you describe your goal as, being a writer?
I still my goal is to crank out 3 novels a year. I want 3 books a year out, and I want I'll do side stuff too, like this novella that I'm coming out with, but that's the pace I want to set for myself. And I want people to read my fiction, obviously, and I want people to enjoy my fiction, but I don't have any sort of like, I don't have a, like, I guess I just don't have that urgency of like, I need to make money at this or fail. And I think what it does for me is it makes writing more fun. And it, like I said, I don't have to get concerned about it. And this isn't for everybody. I mean, this is just my own personal thing. And I'm not saying that other people aren't having fun, being full-time writers or anything like that. But for me, it takes the pressure off. It's just, I can write whatever I want for fun. Mm-hmm. I don't have to worry as much about, making sure. I mean, I business-wise, I've made a lot of big mistakes. I mean, first off, I started with a licensed property, which means people didn't try it out, who might have otherwise. Second, I went into a second subgenre, which is steampunk from space. Usually you should at least do a series in one spot first. Mm-hmm. And kind of make sure you grip your audience that way. From what I hear from almost everybody who makes it really well as an independent author, you really want 3 books of the same series, and on that 3rd book, 3 of them kind of start selling. That is the magic. It varies to what degree, but that is the magic.
It does help a little bit.
Going off into baseball in space instead of even doing the 2nd book in the steampunk or the 2nd book with Star Realms. So I'm having all these new series come out because I wrote all these things over the course of not having a contract or whatever, and they're already mostly done, and I'm going to editing, and I've got all these concepts out. I'll be next year. I'm going to be pretty much doing sequels to all of these, right? But just business wise, I've been able to just write what I want and not have to worry about staying in the series, staying in the subgenre, staying on a marketing plan on that level. And I've just been able to, just like I said, I have a fun concept in my head about baseball in space. I'm just doing it. Helmets.
That's really my takeaway from the entire interview is I now must also write something with pointy helmets.
I mean, they obviously are good for headbutting.
Right.
And I don't know what else.
They're just they're just very stylish,
I think that's very cool. It kind of goes back to the thing, would you write if you weren't getting paid for it? And I think Scott and I have had several discussions of, we get not necessarily depressed, but frustrated and say, why am I doing this? If I made $3 last month, why am I doing this? Or I made $500, why am I doing this? And I said, told it to me, and I've said it to him, kind of a mutual encouragement thing, and said, if you weren't getting paid to write, would you still write? And the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, then continue doing it no matter what. And if you're having fun writing in 8 different series and you put out 1 or 3 or 10 books a year, then I think that's what you should do, and it's different.
Yeah, I literally can't stop writing, and anybody who's done it, it's not easy, whether you're successful or not. And so having a friend like Josh and I, we several times we'll whine to each other or encourage each other. And there's been lots of times when I've been just about ready to just implode, and kind of brings me back down to earth. And so it's good to have a community like Keystroke Medium, or just your writing partner or friend or whoever.
Ken McClellan just said, if I would write without getting paid, if I could get a reaction from people reading it. I think that's big. That's if you could touch somebody's life, whether they paid for your book or not, and they read it and they like it and they say, wow, that's really cool, I'll read more. I think that that is more a measure of success than making a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on my end, I mean, I definitely like getting paid for writing, and I've done. I know by the same token, I mean, I like I said, I made these business mistakes, and if I was running this as a business solely, I would have definitely taken a track of just focusing on one series and make sure that was going.
Right.
But on the other front, I mean, my stuff has done really well. So I'm definitely happy and grateful for that. And what I mostly do is I make almost all the money from my writing. I make sure I just throw phenomenal covers on it. When you've seen the covers for Steam and Country, I mean, those don't come cheap to make a cover of that quality. And I want to make sure I have the best product out there. Getting better editing, getting better proofreading is my next sort of thing that I'm going to be doing. I'm sorry for my readers for not having the best proofreading in my first couple books, but I'm working on that, and I'm definitely plugging the money back into that. So what my readers do for me on that level is they do allow me to do that, which I appreciate.
And I think that's one of the great things about indie publishing or hybrid or whichever way you choose to go is, you get a book out there and you pay for what you can, and if you can't spend the $10,000 some people spend on editing, you pay for what you can, and then you fix it as you go. And yeah, some people are going to gripe and moan that you've got errors, but other people, and maybe more, are going to say, hey, we like this book, and then you move from there. And Laura in the live chat also made a comment just now. She says, at the end of the day, someone just needs to deliver the motivational ass whooping, which is occasionally also necessary. And I would definitely not turn down a $10,000 paycheck. But I would also do it for free. JR asks, who did your cover for the Steam and Country novel?
His name's Sean King, and he actually is
Ragnarok.
Yeah, Ragnarok. I was about to say that. So he's on staff at Ragnarok, and I've always loved their covers a lot. And I've actually, my guy who is my editor also comes from Ragnarok. His name's Tim Marquitz. Marquitz, I think his last name is. Yeah, and have him on the show if you haven't already. He's I love his books. Yeah, both of them came from Ragnarok. They were kind of the most successful of the indies, and they're kind of almost a step above indie now. But I liked them and kind of got in with that crew over the years, and always wanted to work with them.
Yeah, Sean King does really, really good covers, and also his interior design work is pretty good. He did a I'm gonna drop Sanderson here really quick.
The snapshot.
Yep.
I've got that.
I've got the hardback for
me too.
His and this is a limited edition hardback, but he did the cover, but he also did the interior design, and that I think that was pretty cool. And this novel, he said it's a short story, but it's really like not.
Short stories like 3 books, 3.
My novella I'm releasing next week or whatever is probably a little shorter than that. So.
Yeah, great books though, and I wish we had more time to talk about novellas, because I like reading those, because you can do so much with a novella that you can't do with a novel or a short story. And I think the Writing Excuses had an episode about that a couple episodes back, where they were talking about the shorter form. Cool. So we are wrapping up to the end of the hour, and so I like to ask authors if they could give a piece of advice to themselves from now back to when they first started, especially the authors just starting out now. What do you think that advice would be?
Well, for me, I spent a lot of time running RPG chats as a GM, and I was using my storytelling that way for a decade. And so I would say knock off that and just write every single day. Spend that time writing it instead of gaming. I know a lot of people love gaming, but if you want to get serious about it, you gotta make sacrifices. And the time for gaming, the time for video games, that sort of thing, those are the things that are the easiest to cut out and not impact your life in a negative manner. So I would have gotten rid of those, and I would have. I was at a conference once, and I was told everything in life is a commitment or a distraction. Distractions and getting more commitments is the way to make professional work.
Yeah, that's
agreed.
a good point.
Very.
You can
very
also
good.
quit mowing your yard depending on your neighbors and rules.
I actually, that's great that you talk about video games, because I had to buy my first Mac, well, my second Mac actually. My wife made me sell my PC gaming computer, and so I sold a gaming computer for like $1,500 that I built custom, and then bought the Mac, because you'd sit down and I'd play a game for like 10 hours straight and not get any work done. So you
I
got
did tons. I used to do tons of that.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of games I'd like to play right now that people talk about, like Mass Effect, but I haven't played a video game in any serious capacity for probably 5 or 10 years now, because I just enjoy it too much.
Me too.
Well, John, thanks so much for coming on the show today, man. It was a blast having you on and talking with you. We'll have to have you on again sometime, maybe when your space opera series starts coming out. And
that'd be great.
We can have you back on to talk about that more in depth. Everybody that hung out in the live chat, thanks for coming and hanging out with us always on a Monday morning. It's great to see you guys. Mayhem and shenanigans are aplenty in the live chat. So if you're listening on the stream and not in the live show, you're really missing out on a whole bunch of great things that happen there. Next week we have Mark Wandry, and speaking of Mark Wandry and Chris Kennedy, they're going to be on the show doing a duology show next week, and then we have Evan Curry after that.
Is that a real word?
Duology, yes. I think I just made it up, and it is. Write that down. Craig Martell is going to be on the 16th talking about the 20 Books to 50K conference coming up in November, so that'll be kind of fun. So
which we're both going to. That's going to be good times.
There's going to be some serious mayhem and shenanigans going on for that show. So
in Vegas.
Yes. Stay tuned for that. Let us know what you thought about the show. Let us know in the comments below or on our website. Obviously, hit that subscribe button and follow us on YouTube and on Facebook, keystroke.medium.com. For Scott Moon, I am Josh Hayes. We have been live with Jon Del Arroz. Come back next time. Join us as we talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing and, of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. You guys have a fantastic day.